All right, we are live. Great to be here. I am joined today by Kevin Ingram, and Kevin has a lot of really interesting things about his biography that we're going to explore. The main things you need to know right now is Kevin's the executive vice president and chief financial officer of FM Global, which is one of the world's largest commercial and industrial property insurers. And one thing that jumped out at me, Roy, Kevin has actually worked there for 30 years, which I know a lot of CFOs. I think Kevin might be one of a very, very small number that's been there for 30 years, wide variety of jobs. And I'm going to talk about that first. But Kevin, why don't you fill the blanks in a little bit about on your biography? Tell the listeners about your journey and that type of thing.
Great, thanks, Jack. I first of all, thank you for having me on today. I really appreciate it. I grew up in Illinois. Went to school in DeKalb, Illinois. University called Northern Illinois University. Got my accounting degree. Went to work in public accounting, as most people do when they get accounting degrees.
Mm-hmm.
Went to work at Ernst and Winnie. I'll date myself. I'm an old guy.
Ooh,
It was Ernst and Winnie when I was there.
Pete Mawick and Mitchell right here.
There you go. Yeah. And then it became Ernst and Young. I was there when the merger happened between Ernst and Winnie and Arthur Young. Became Ernst and Young when I was there. I was there for a little over 6 years, and left and went to work for one of my clients, as one typically does when they leave public accounting. A lot of times you go and you go to work at a client. And I worked at that client. It was a commercial property insurance company based in Park Ridge, Illinois. And they merged with two other insurance companies in 1999. So I moved from Illinois to Rhode Island when that happened, because the corporation, the merged organization, was headquartered in Rhode Island. And spent about the next 10 years in Rhode Island in a variety of finance roles. And then in 2010, January 2010, moved to London. It was great. So actually moved to Windsor, where the Queen's Castle is. We had an operation in Windsor. I was the finance director for our non-U.S., non-North American businesses. It's about 800 million pounds of revenue in that UK company. Worked there for 5 years, left at the mid to late 2014, moved back to wonderful Johnston, Rhode Island, where the corporate office was. Had to get back on the treadmill at corporate. Left finance, went into work in a group called Corporate Services. So it basically gave me responsibility for our capital management and business process improvement and a group of people, consultants we call business risk consultants. And then overall analytics, did a bunch of different things, and it was called Corporate Services. So I was the senior VP of Corporate Services, and our CEO told me, he said, it's great, because he said, I made you senior VP of Corporate Services, which means absolutely nothing to anybody. So if there's something I want to move into your area, I can do it. Nobody can tell me it doesn't belong there. So risk management moved in, and something else moved in. He said, nobody can tell me it doesn't belong, because nobody knows what corporate services is. So I did that for about 2.5 years, and then our CFO retired, and I went and talked to the CEO. He's like, yeah, that's great. So I became CFO in 2016. So fall of 2016, I became CFO of the organization, and it's been a good run. And so now I'm, as you said, the senior executive vice president, CFO of FM Global, and just kind of enjoying the ride. We'll see how it plays out from here.
Yeah, it sounds like a great story, and I love that we don't really know what this division does. So, management by confusion. There's got to be a book in there.
Oh yeah,
probably catch your title. But one thing, Kevin, as I think you know, I was introduced to you by FM Global's public relations team, and they leaked to me that you were a grocery clerk when you were 14 years old. Was that was your first job?
That was the first job I had, and I did that for a long time. And it was a small independent grocery store where I grew up in Aurora, Illinois. And I worked there, gosh, from the time I was in 8th grade until through university, until I got an internship when I was between my junior and senior years at university. I'd go home from school and I'd work in Christmas break or summer breaks, and I did everything in that store. I mean, everything except work in the meat department. Stocked shelves and ran the cash registers and did produce and the deli, and it was fun. It was a great thing. And, I think when you start working young, you learn responsibility and being placed on time. And I to this day, I hate being late for anything. If my wife and I have been married 35 years. If we're going somewhere that I've organized, we've got an understanding that when I say it's time if we're going to leave at 3:00, we're going to leave at 3:00. If it's something she's organized, I'll be sitting there on the couch watching the ball game, and when you're ready to go, let me know. And if the thing started at 4 and we leave at 5, that's okay because it's your thing, not my thing. But it's pretty funny, so it's a good deal.
It's interesting. Yeah, it's I've noticed that about you because this is our third time getting together, and like we were meeting at 11:45, and you were on like at 11:45 and 0 seconds. I'm wondering if you have a friend at the Naval Observatory clock or something like that to set the time precisely. So yeah, it's interesting. I worked at Fort when I was 14 too, and I think we're both really fortunate to have grown up when there were no child labor laws.
Yeah.
That parents could have a 14-year-old work. But
Yeah.
I think I don't regret it at all. It built character and gave me some responsibility that, I would have eventually gotten. I just got a little bit ahead of the curve. So, but cool. Anyway, I want to chat with you about FM Global, but you shared with me an interesting tidbit when we were waiting that you're everybody's going back to work Monday at FM Global. Do I have that right?
Yeah, we came back. We opened our corporate office on October 4th. So we brought people back. We made it a soft opening. We said, look, work with your managers, see what makes sense for you. My view on this was, and I told my finance managers, we need to get people back here. We need to get them back in the office, and we try to get them back. Ideally, our plan is 3 days a week in the office and 2 days a week working virtually. We spent the last 18 plus months, working virtually. It's been very effective. The company has done incredibly well. Have had great results over the last 2-3 years. So the pandemic hasn't really impacted us significantly from a work performance perspective, but you lose so much by not being together, right? You lose the mentoring aspect, you lose the chance for impromptu meetings, problem solving, collaboration, all that stuff goes out the window. When you're doing things virtually, everybody has to schedule everything. There's nothing impromptu about having a virtual work environment. So I think there's a lot of benefits to getting people back in the office, and so we're really we're guardedly optimistic that's going to happen. This office, our building here holds about just under 1,000 people. The first day on Monday, we had 210 people in the building. So it's going the right way. We'll see how it plays out. But this is a big issue I think a lot of companies are going to face, a lot of CFOs and other individuals are going to face as they bring their workforce back the same way, because the world has changed. Over the last 18 months, the world has changed. We are not the same. We are not going to operate. We're not going to transact business the same way going forward as we did, 2.5 years, 3 years ago.
No, absolutely. And, it's interesting because I personally observed a switch, and I'm not sure if you've seen it too, but when it started, it was kind of the young people like, yeah, even before the pandemic, work from home. I want to be able to work from home. And sort of, those of us who are, of a certain age, as the thing goes, we weren't necessarily into it as much. Like, come on, all the points you just made about mentoring and developing relationships. And, they're all valid, but I've actually seen a bit of a switch where I've seen the 20-somethings realize that, hey, wait a second, there actually is value to meeting with your coworkers in person, to having time with your boss or somebody to mentor you a little bit and teach you, because it's just easier to teach when you're in person, and the intrinsic value of impromptu meetings. And at the same token, I've seen like boomers say, hey, this isn't so bad. I have an extra hour and a half a day that I'm not spending sitting listening to sports talk radio or classic rock and roll. But I think fundamentally, most companies eventually are going to be, largely in the office with the work from home element too. So, but
yeah, you're absolutely right, and we've seen that too. I think what we're seeing, Jack, is that a lot of these millennials and people that have started with my company in the last 18 months since we've been virtual, they've not had the opportunity for that collaboration, that impromptu stuff. And now we're hiring new people, and they're going to come into the office, and so they're going to the concern is that they're going to pass them quickly because they've got this opportunity for collaboration, impromptu meetings, and everything else that these people never had. So are they going to be behind the 8 ball because we expect them to be further along the path and from a career development perspective, but they really have missed a fundamental part of how you develop those skills.
Yeah, and we may not know how big a thing that is. We don't know now. I mean, credit to companies and employees. We've kept this thing going in the most challenging circumstances. But 3-5 years from now, we might some things might be revealed when the class of 2021 is somehow outperforming the class of 2020. How's that happening, right? So. And just one of those accidental things. But so I want to chat a little bit, because I have to admit, I'd heard of FM Global, but wasn't super familiar with it until you reached out to me, despite, living not too far from it, Rhode Island and Massachusetts in our cases. But tell me a little about FM Global, size, if there's particular areas that you specialize in.
Yeah, FM Global is a commercial property insurance company. All we insure is large commercial property. Don't do anything else. Been around, as the name would indicate, FM Global. We're a global insurance company. We insure facilities all around the world. Company was formed in 1835, so been around a long, long time. We specialize in loss prevention, providing engineering services, and really helping our clients avoid having losses. We have a research facility in Rhode Island, Western Rhode Island, where we do all kinds of research on how to prevent different types of property damage, whether it be wind, flood, earthquake, fire, explosion, whatever the perils may be that our policyholders could sustain. We try to help them understand what they can do to mitigate those exposures, and that's what our business is all about. We have about $7 billion of global written premium. We got over $19 billion of capital at the end of August of this year. So it's a nice sized organization. We're a mutual insurance company, so we're owned by our policyholders. That's important for us because when you're in the commercial property business, you tend to have more volatile operating results because if you have big windstorms, so say think in 2017 you had Harvey, Irma, Maria, big hurricanes that hit the shores. When those type of events occur, commercial property insurance companies like us, they're going to have very, very, going to have big underwriting losses. You're going to lose money typically in a year like that. In a year you get like last year where there were a lot of named storms, but nothing particularly onerous, nothing particularly significant that caused a lot of damage. The industry is going to have a little lower losses, like in 2020 or in 2019 was the same kind of scenario. So very volatile results. And if you're a mutual, you can withstand that volatility. But if you're a publicly traded company, that volatility is something that's going to kill your share price and it can cause you big problems. So it's important to have the right corporate structure in place, and we do in that regard.
Okay, that's interesting because I always wondered why so many insurance companies seem to be mutual companies. I mean, in my neck of the Liberty Mutual and Mass Mutual I think they're two of the 5 biggest companies in Massachusetts. And I just don't know anyone at the companies to have asked the question. So cool. But anyway, I'd like to sort of build upon that a little bit, Kevin. Oh, and by the way, I forgot to mention, we are truly live on LinkedIn. So if you do have any questions for Kevin, if you enter them in the comments box, we will actually be able to see them and answer them in real time. If we miss any, perhaps Kevin can, go back and enter, type the answers in. But we encourage you to do that if we could. But I want to get, a little free consulting here for our members. You're probably one of the foremost experts in the world. And it seems like weather situations are only getting worse. We're in an extreme weather pattern here right now. What are the things CFOs should be thinking of and sort of proactively doing to mitigate the risk? Because it kind of seems like when, not if at this point, right?
Yeah, climate change is obviously a real phenomenon. It's something that's going to have a big impact on facilities around the world, right? I mean, whether it's office buildings or manufacturing sites or whatever the case may be, airports. And so climate change is a big deal. And climate change impacts us by, changing rainfall patterns, sea surface levels rising because of the ice caps are melting and all kinds of things like that. So it's the first and foremost, I would advise any CFO, anyone on the call, anyone that's listening to us today, what you want to do is you really want to pay particular attention to understanding the risk. What's your exposure? What is your risk for flood exposure or for wildfire exposure, and how has that changed as a result of climate change? And what can you do? There are things you can do to mitigate flood exposure. There are things you can do to mitigate, windstorms, hurricanes, wildfires. So understanding first and foremost, what's the exposure that my facility has? And then how critical is that facility for my business? Is it going, if this facility gets impacted by a wildfire or by a flood and it causes us to shut down for a period of time, whether that's 6 months or 2 months or 2 weeks, what impact is that going to have on my business? If it's something that you can live through, that's fine. That's one thing. But understand it's really risk assessment. Once you understand that, then the next question is, what can I do to mitigate that exposure? So understanding the exposure is first. That's the first thing you got to do. Second thing then is, how do I mitigate that exposure? What can I do to address that risk? Because the risk of me shutting that facility down for a month or 2 months is too significant for my business. So tell me what I need to do, what investments I can make to make that reduce that exposure to 2 hours or 2 days versus 2 months long in duration. And that's what my company does. That's exactly what we do to help our clients understand what they can do, prioritize the risk improvement, so making sure it gets done. Because look, at the end of the day, no one has an unlimited amount of money. I'm a CFO. I mean, we don't have an unlimited amount of money to spend on loss mitigation, right? Risk improvement. So you want to help prioritize that money. The spend is where it needs to be, where you're going to get the most bang for your buck and really derive the most benefit for our policyholders. And that's what we do.
Yeah, it's interesting. No one has an unlimited amount of money, because you'd be surprised how many people think that we do have an unlimited amount of money. Even, I work for a really small company. We recently sold, but before the sale, we were 8 employees and 15 independent contractors. So by any definition, that's pretty small. And, my team certainly realized, there's not an unlimited amount of funds there, but people probably look at a company like, your size and think, unlimited amount of money, nothing to worry about at all right here. So, but how about, are there any other things? Like, I know we talked a little about floods and weather scenarios, but what about like a terrorist attack or something, like a man-made type of disaster? Are they the same issues, or do they need to think about those a little bit differently?
Well, I think you want to understand what your exposure is, right? I mean, I think now 9/11 opened everyone's eyes to that, but also terrorism. So, before 9/11, terrorism was not a peril that was excluded from most property forms, right? I mean, so, and then what's happened after 9/11 is, the terrorism was started to be underwritten differently, and so the insurance industry started to respond differently to terrorism, and then it comes into the federal government backstop, which is TRIA and everything else, or Pool Re in the UK and the Garriott in France, and different things that are in place from a terrorism perspective. But you want to understand what the exposure is, and now I think people are looking at it thinking, what's the likelihood of having a plane crash into a building like you had in 9/11? I think it's much lower today as a result of all the mitigation that's happened. Think of what TSA and everything that's gone in place post 9/11. So now I think the thing that people typically look at is like a truck bomb, or you get some vehicle with, like the McVeigh explosion in Oklahoma City that was back 15, 20 years ago, whenever that was. Looking at that, probably more than 20 years ago now, actually. That's the big exposure where someone pulls up in front of your facility and blows it up. What impact does that have? Then you get into other things like nuclear, biological, radiological type exposure, and what's the impact of that. Chemical exposures, same kind of thing, right? So it's just understanding. The biggest thing is trying to look at, what exposure do I have? Do you have a facility where you've limited access? There's a guard station. People can't access it. You probably have buttoned up your envelope sufficiently where you're in pretty good shape from a terrorism perspective. Now you get into things. The other big exposure now is cyber, right? So what's going to happen? Now can people get into the controls, the internet, with the Internet of Things, get into the controls of your turbine, or if you're a power gen organization or whatever it is, and cause problems there as well. So cyber is causing big issues from a commercial property perspective as well. And those are all things you got to manage your way through from a loss risk assessment and understanding the risk, and then what can we do to mitigate it.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that, because when I think of cyber, I think maybe of my employees' privacy or my customers' privacy or something like that. But there's actually property issues associated with cyber too, depending upon what industry you're in, I suppose. But yeah, the idea of someone getting control of like the power grid or whatever, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and there are people just have nothing better to do with their time than to think of ways, right? So
they try to monetize it somehow, right? So ransomware or whatever it is, right? So you look at remember earlier this year, in early 2021, where people in the Southeast U.S. couldn't get fuel. They were lined up to get fuel because the pipeline was shut down because of a ransomware attack.
Yeah. Oh, it's scary. We're at the mercy of people. We've created incredible conveniences, and at the same time just created some unbelievable vulnerabilities, to say the least. So, but Kevin, I want to chat a little about your experience as an executive and leader during COVID. Like any CFO, you had a lot of challenges, and it's not like there was a blueprint out there, right? How to run a business during a pandemic. The last major pandemic was the Spanish flu in 1918 or whenever it was, right? So not a lot of people that you can pick their brains and figure out what they did, right? So you're sort of faced with this situation, and you've got to figure it out in real time. What was that like for you and your team?
Yeah, first and foremost, I think what you need to do is you need to realize that that the pandemic was impacting all your employees, right? So we say, and every company pretty much says our employees are our most valuable asset, and they really are. And so you want people to understand that you are concerned about them, and you want to make sure that they're able to, that first and foremost, that them and that they and their families are safe, and that they're in a good place, and if there's something they need, you want to try and help them and reach out. But you still need to transact business, right? We still have a business to run. So then in the next step was, how do we ensure people have all of the technology they need? How do you ensure that the people are able to get the access to the systems that they need to continue to do business virtually versus doing it in person? Like what the pandemic did for us, and I think for most businesses around the world, is it gave us a real live business continuity test to go out there and understand how our business can function working virtually instead of working all in the same office. But the other thing it did with the pandemic is it created a new exposure, because now everyone's remoting into your systems. So does that create additional cyber exposure for our organization? How do you mitigate that exposure? Because now are we opening up some doors somewhere that's going to allow somebody else to get access to our systems and our data and everything else, which could be problematic. So just, you created new problems as well. And then not to mention what we already talked about earlier was the fact that you lose a lot of benefits of being in the office. Look, as I said, my company was very, very successful, through the pandemic. And a big reason why that was is because we were an office-based employer before. Now we spent the last 18 plus months no longer being an office-based employer. Everyone's working virtually. So we've lost the benefit of getting everybody together and all that, the collaboration, everything that occurs. And we got to start to get some of that back, because it's a different organization. And look, the business model has changed. We know it's changed. We know we're going to operate differently going forward than we were before. But I think there needs to be something of a hybrid where we've got some people in the office, some, and working virtually some as well. But there is as you said, there's a real deal is for people is, well, I don't have that commute anymore. That commute is wasted time, and it is. And you realize that over the last 18 months, but you chose to live where you live, and that hasn't changed as a result of the pandemic. It's just become more real for you because you realize you can do it, but you're losing all these other benefits, and how do you pick it up?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. And you mentioned, that your company's grown. And have you added any employees within your own organization of finance and accounting? And I'm
Yeah,
wondering, do you have employees you've never met? So,
yeah, and I wandered downstairs yesterday. I met a new employee yesterday who works in our statutory reporting group, right? But we have indeed hired people, because we had some people that left, and so we've hired some new people to replace them. I brought in more people in my risk management department as well. And I bet there's a couple dozen people that we've hired over the period of the pandemic that I've never met. But also, there are a couple of situations I know of where we've hired people, and you try to do it virtually so that you get no in-person interviews, and they didn't work out because we weren't effective at screening these individuals, and we had some problems, and we had to make some changes. And that's tough too, because now you're starting from scratch, and you make this investment in these individuals, and it doesn't pan out.
yeah, no, that makes a whole lot of sense. In fact, running a member organization, we have about 1,800 members. So, collectively, we've seen everything. But probably, 300 of them have started their jobs since the beginning of 2020, which,
Yeah.
And several of them started after the pandemic. So they were hired as a CFO, never having met the CEO in person, maybe, unless they knew him or her before, never having met the board. Don't really know their team very well, right? I can't imagine what that would be like. Luckily my team was kind of in place, and we've added one or two here and there, but by and large, we've gotten to, it's been the same team, but it's just so many dynamics in place. So, but one of the things, you've had an interesting background. One of the things that I liked about you started off in public accounting, so sort of the accounting, reporting, compliance, but you've had a lot of strategic and operational roles in your company. And can you tell us, how that prepared you to be the CFO? It's a big company. You were a CFO at a relatively young age. You're 27, you told me, I think.
Yeah, when I left public accounting, I was 20.
Yeah. So, I was being a wise guy. I said you're 27 today, but you've done some things outside of finance and accounting, and then sort of come back to be the CFO. And how has that experience sort of prepared you for the role? Because it's no longer just about the numbers anymore.
Yeah, look, I think it's true for any business. You need to understand, what your business is, and the more opportunity I have to talk to policyholders or clients, the better off we are, right? The more time I spend talking to my operations people, and so when I had those operations roles to understand what the real problems we were facing, it allowed me then as I get into my CFO role to help do the prioritization of what do you spend the money on, what are you going to do, what are the projects you're going to undertake. You're looking at right now the world is changing, right? Where everything's digital this, digital that. Trying to client access, and how are you going to provide it in a more streamlined way. Everything's social engineering and everything else, and it's like that costs a lot of money. So you're going to spend the money, but let's make sure that you understand what the benefits are, what the paybacks are going to be, so you can prioritize that stuff, because you can't do everything. And so spending time with the business, understanding truly what the customers are seeing, what the pain points are, it helps you really as you go through that prioritization process from a risk improvement, from an investment perspective, investing back into the business.
Yeah, it makes so much sense, right? There was a day, that the CFO was sometimes the best accountant would become the CFO in a given company. And, maybe in an unsophisticated business in an unsophisticated time, that actually probably made a whole lot of sense. It seemed to work. But now, complexity of business, rapid changing, just the need for strategic thinking across the entire executive team. In most instances, it doesn't work that way. You want somebody that thinks beyond just the numbers, and the numbers supplement what they think, but it's really about the strategy and growth and understanding your business models. So cool.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So cool. Well, anyway, we're actually coming up on the 12:30 target time, but I want to give you an opportunity. Any advice that you want to give, CFOs who don't have your expertise on risk management, whether it be in the area of some of the things we've discussed, or thinking like a 3 to 5 year plan. What are the things that CFOs should be considering?
Look, I think, when I talk to my risk manager, he continues to open my eyes to new things that I haven't thought about, right? And, right now, the big thing for us, as it is for anybody, and I've touched on a couple of times, is cyber. What's the cyber insurance coverage I'm buying? How much is available? What is it? What is it covering me for? What's the exposure that I have from a business perspective? So it comes back to what I said before, Jack, understanding the exposure, right? And it's not for us, it's all commercial property, because that's all we do when we talk to our clients. But as the CFO of my organization, as other CFOs are going to face, it's not just commercial property we care about. It's the entire risk of exposures that we need to understand. And how well do we understand those exposures? How well do we understand the things that could have significant impact on the organization? And what are we doing? What steps have we put in place to mitigate those exposures, or at least understand what the potential magnitude is, and what the investment is we need to make over a period of time to mitigate those exposures. I'd like everyone to focus on the commercial properties and exposures, because that's what my business does. But as the owner of capital management of my company, we focus on much more than just commercial property. We focus on everything across the board, because at the end of the day, it could be a property exposure, it could be a geopolitical exposure, it could be any number of things that could impact the organization, have a big impact on your ability to transact business going forward. And at the end of the day, all I care about is what's best for FM Global, and how do I ensure that we're in as strong a place as we can be, 3, 5, 10 years down the road. I'm 59 years old. I'll be retired within the next 5, 6 years, if not earlier. So I want to make sure this organization is set up to be very, very successful well after I'm gone.
That's great. Cool. Okay. Do you want to give your company's website in case people want to check out FM Global and learn a little bit more?
That's great. Thanks, Jack. It's www.fmglobal.com.
Okay. And we won't share your contact information here, but what I generally do is, if people have follow-up questions, I ask them to reach out to me, which is jack@cfolc.com. It's on my website, so it's pretty much out there. And then I will make an introduction to Kevin directly. So there were no questions, so I guess we were just that thorough in our conversation.
There you go.
Kevin, I want to thank you so much for your time here today. I know you're a busy guy, and I wish you well with the reopen, and let us know how that all works out for you.
Thanks, Jack. I appreciate it, and I'm happy to answer any questions if anyone does have anything. So just let me know. Appreciate your time. Thanks for the invite.
Thanks. Have a good one.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.